it's Grandma. Are you ready for Grandma's story time? I've got my story bag here. Here it is. It's my bag with purple circles and golden elephants and blue circles with golden elephants and red circles. And my story bag is a home. You know who it's home for? It's my home for Peter. Oh, what are you doing? You're upside down there. Come out. You happy to see you again? You are. Oh, you want to find out what happens? You don't know what happens? No. Can you remember what's happened? Peter and Molly and Winks have gone to see Mr. Spells, and they found him at Mrs. Spells' house. Is that right? And then he looked out the window and Hoot the owl came, didn't he? And what did Hoot say? You can't remember? Oh, we have to read the book. Okay, here's the book. Now, do you remember what chapter we're up to? Let's have a look. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. We're up to number 19. Okay, Peter can go back in the bag. Put on your glasses, Grandma. Oops. And let's begin. The wishing chair again. We're up to chapter 19. Away on another adventure.
We can't do anything this evening,
said Mr. Spells.
That's quite certain. Anyway, the first thing to do is to find out where the wandering castle is.
Don't you know? Asked Molly, surprised. She thought Mr. Spells knew everything.
I know where it was last year, and the year before that, even last month,
said Mr. Spells.
But I don't know where it is now. It may have wandered anywhere.
Oh, does it move about? Asked Peter in amazement.
Good gracious, yes. It's always wandering,
said the Enchanter.
One day it may be here, the next day it might be somewhere else. Giant Twisty finds that very useful, because he's always getting into trouble because of his bad ways. It's very convenient to have a castle that can slip away in the night.
It's going to be very difficult to find then, isn't it? Said Molly. I mean, even if we find out where it is, it may not be there, even when we get there.
True, but there's a chance it may rest in some place for weeks,
said Mr. Spells.
Winks, what are you doing?
Winks jumped.
Just stirring stuff in this pot, sir,
he said.
Look at your hands,
thundered Mr. Spells.
You've been dipping them in, and now, see what you've done, meddlesome brownie.
Winks looked at his hands. Oh dear, they were bright blue. He stared at them in horror.
Now you know what your grandmother's pigs must have felt like when you turned them blue,
he said.
Well, keep your blue hands. Every time you look at them, you can say to yourself, I must not meddle. I must not meddle.
Winks put his hands into his pockets, looking very soulful.
Well, children,
said Mr. Spells,
I think you'd better leave things to me tonight. I'll do my best to find out where the wandering castle happens to be at the moment, and we'll make a good plan and we'll make a good plan to get back the chair and Chinky. Can you come along early tomorrow morning?
Yes, we'll ask Mother to let us go out for the day, said Peter. Come on, Molly. Thank you, Mr. Spells, for your help. Goodbye, Mrs. Spells. Goodbye. Goodbye, Cinders. Goodbye, Mrs. Spells.
You can go out the door if you like,
said the Enchanter, and the children suddenly saw a small silver door gleaming in the wall near the window that looked out on the hillside. They were sure they hadn't seen it before. Cinders opened it for them. He bowed politely to the children, but dug a claw into Winks, who yelled and shot outside in a hurry. Winks turned and shook a bright blue fist at the cat. Where are we? Said Peter as they walked down the hillside. It was now filling with shadows as the sun sank low. Goodness! Why, we're back in our garden! And so it was, just nearby. How very extraordinary! If only people knew how near their gardens were to curious, wonderful places. How surprised they would be, said Molly, walking in at their side gate and going into the playroom. Well, we can take that shortcut tomorrow. I do wonder how it is that the sea is outside that other window. I simply can't understand that. They said goodbye to Winks, who had tried in vain to wash the blue off his hands under the garden tap. Then off they went to ask their mother if they could have their whole day to themselves tomorrow. She said yes, of course they could. It would do them good to go into the country in a lovely summer weather they were having right now. Well, I don't know what Mother would say if she knew we were going out to hunt for Giant Twisty and his wandering castle, said Peter. I suppose she just wouldn't believe it. The next day, the children had breakfast very early indeed and set off down the garden to collect Winks. His hands were still as blue as ever, so he had put on a pair of gloves. Oh, you've borrowed them from my biggest doll, Winks, said Molly. You might have asked permission first. I would have said, no, certainly, you can't have them.
Well, I felt sure you wouldn't let me,
said Winks.
That's why I didn't ask you. I'll take great care of them, Molly. I really will. Your doll doesn't mind a bit.
They went out of the garden gate and looked around. Where was that shortcut now? They couldn't find it. But Winks spotted it.
I've better eyes for strange things than you have, said Winks. I can see little shining paths in the grass that you can't see. Follow me.
Well, you must be right, said Peter. Well, you must be right, said Peter, as Winks led them straight over the grass to the same trees on the same sunny hillside they'd seen the day before. And there's a little silver door. Cinders opened it as they came near. Winks shot in so quickly that he didn't have time to scratch the brownie, although he did try. Mr. Spells was there, surrounded by paper and old books of all sorts.
My mother is still asleep in bed,
he said.
I'm glad you're early. We can start off straight away.
Oh, have you found out where the wandering castle is? Asked Molly in delight. Did your magic book tell you?
They helped,
said Mr. Spells.
And Cinders and I did a find-out spell we know. Wandering Castle is now on the island belonging to Giant Small One, Twisty's brother.
Giant Small One? That's a funny name, said Molly.
Not really,
said Mr. Spells.
He's small for a giant, that's all. Well, we'd better start.
But how can we get to an island? Said Peter. We haven't got a wishing chair to fly over the sea. That doesn't matter, said Mr. Spills.
Cinders has been getting my ship ready.
He pointed to the window that so surprisingly looked out to sea. The children stared in wonder and delight. A most beautiful ship rocked gently on the calm sea. A picture of loveliness with its big white sails. Molly cried out in joy, "Oh, what a beauty! And she's called Molly!"
Just a little compliment to you,
said Mr. Spills, smiling.
It's also supposed to be lucky to sail in a ship bearing the passengers' names. Well, shall we set off? The wind is just right.
Cinders opened the window. Just outside was a stone ledge with steps leading down to a tiny jetty. Cinders went first and helped Molly down. They all stepped aboard the beautiful white-sailed ship. Mr. Spills took the tiller.
Blow, wind, blow, and on we'll go, over the waters blue.
He sang, and the ship leapt forward. Is that a spell you sang? Said Molly.
Oh no, just a little song,
said Mr. Spills, and he began to sing again, while the ship sailed lightly over the blue waters. The children and Winks enjoyed it very much. Molly trailed her hand in the water. Did we bring any food? Asked Molly suddenly. I'm hungry.
No,
said Mr. Spills, and everyone at once looked rather gloomy.
Enchanters don't need to,
he went on.
I always carry a spell in my pocket that I use for when I need food.
Soon they were all eating and drinking as the ship sped on and on. For 2 hours the ship sailed, and then Cinders gave a shout. Meow! Land ahoy! It's the island, Mr. Spills.
Aha,
said the Enchanter.
Now we must be a bit careful.
They all looked hard at the island that was rapidly coming nearer as the ship sped over the water. It didn't look very big. It was crowded with tall buildings. Some of them looked like palaces and some like castles. Which is a wandering castle, I suppose? Asked Molly.
Can't possibly tell,
said Mr. Spills.
Now here we go towards this little jetty. We'll land there. You'll have to watch out a bit, because several giants live here, and you don't want to be trodden on like ants.
Molly didn't like the sound of this much. She was determined to keep very close to Mr. Spills. Cinders was left with the ship, much to Wink's relief. They all set off up an extremely wide street.
We shall be all right if we keep to the narrow pavements that run beside the walls of the buildings,
said Mr. Spills, guiding them to one.
There are plenty of small folk living here, as well as giants.
And so there were. Pixies and brownies and goblins and elves. But there were also giants, and Molly suddenly saw a most enormous foot, followed by another one, walking down the street. She sank close to Mr. Spills. When the giant came by, the children tried to see the top of him, but he was too tall.
That's a large-sized giant,
said Mr. Spills.
I know him, nice fellow, called Too Big. Here's a smaller one.
It was exciting and extraordinary to see giants walking about. Mr. Spells guided them to a palace not quite so tall as some of the buildings.
This is where Giant Small One lives. The giant the island belongs
To, he said.
Come along, we will ask him the whereabouts of his brother's wandering castle. Don't be afraid, I'm much more powerful than he is, and he knows it.
They went up a long, long flight of stairs. At the top was a big open door leading to a vast hall. At the end of the hall sat a giant, but he was such a small one that he wasn't more than twice the size of the Enchanter himself. Advance, Mr. Spells, and pay your respects to Giant Small One, boomed an enormous voice from somewhere. Mr. Spells boldly went forward. Now they could find out what they wanted to know. That's the end of the chapter. Do you know what they want to know? They want to know where Chinky is. So they need to find out where Giant Small One's brother, Giant Twisty, is. Come back tomorrow. We have to find out. This is an adventure. Bye-bye.